Welcome to my video. Please subscribe my channel. Let's talk about tariffs. Yes, really. Because what just happened at the Supreme Court could have ripple effects on your wallet, your job, and the way America does business with the rest of the world. The Supreme Court just handed down a decision that's more than just legal jargon. It's a game changer for international trade and presidential power. In a landmark 6-3 ruling, the court told the president he can't just use national security as a catch-all excuse to slap tariffs on anything he wants, whenever he wants. For years, presidents from both parties have used this loophole to impose tariffs on everything from Canadian steel to Mexican aluminum, sidestepping Congress and shaking up global supply chains. The Supreme Court called foul, putting an end to the era of sweeping president-led trade wars justified by vague national security claims and restoring a crucial check on executive power. This isn't just a legal technicality. It's a constitutional earthquake that shakes up the balance of power in Washington and could reshape how America interacts with the global economy. The court reasserted that Congress, not the president, controls the power of the purse and the authority to regulate commerce with foreign nations, a fundamental principle that dates back to the founding of the country. Think of it like the president maxing out a credit card meant for emergencies, using it for all sorts of purchases, and finally being told, enough is enough. The Supreme Court just cut up that card, putting strict limits on when and how it can be used. The implications are huge, affecting everything from car prices and manufacturing jobs to the cost of everyday goods that rely on imported materials. It also sends a strong signal to America's allies and trading partners that the rules of the game are changing and that the U.S. is returning to a more predictable, law-based approach to trade. For businesses, this decision is a lighthouse in a storm of unpredictable costs, offering hope for more stability and fewer sudden policy shifts that can disrupt planning and investment. For consumers, it could mean a slow return to normal prices on everything from groceries to electronics, as tariffs are rolled back and supply chains stabilize. And for the president, it's a clear message. Your powers aren't unlimited, and you can't go it alone when it comes to reshaping the nation's economy. The balance of power just shifted in a big way, and the effects of this decision will be felt for years to come. To understand why this Supreme Court ruling is so significant, let's rewind to 2018, a year that marked a dramatic turning point in U.S. trade policy. That year, the Trump administration dusted off Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. This was a Cold War-era law, originally designed for true emergencies, like protecting the country's defense industries during times of war or crisis. But instead of a military threat, the administration used it to justify sweeping tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, arguing that America's economic strength was at stake. Suddenly, even imports from some of America's closest allies, countries like Canada and members of the European Union, were labeled national security threats. This move shocked many, as these nations had long been considered partners, not adversaries. What began as a targeted tool for specific industries quickly morphed into the centerpiece of an aggressive, America First trade policy. The administration launched a massive trade war with China and floated plans for even broader tariffs on a wide range of goods, affecting global supply chains and markets. The administration's argument was that a strong economy was itself a matter of national security, a definition so broad it could be used to justify tariffs on almost anything, from cars to washing machines. This approach upended decades of U.S. policy that had favored free trade, open markets, and international cooperation. Suddenly, old alliances were strained, and global trading partners were left scrambling to respond. Businesses and industry groups across the country, feeling unfairly targeted and facing higher costs, challenged the president's use of this powerful law. Many argued that the tariffs were hurting American manufacturers and consumers alike. They contended that the president was turning a narrow security measure into a blunt instrument for economic protectionism, far beyond what Congress had ever intended. Their legal fight set the stage for a high-stakes Supreme Court showdown, with the future of U.S. trade policy hanging in the balance. And now, with the court's decision, the rules of the game have changed, reshaping how America can use tariffs in the name of national security. When the case hit the Supreme Court, it was less about steel and more about who gets to make the rules. Challengers argued Congress gave the president a limited tool, not a blank check to control the economy. They warned that without limits, the president could use tariffs to reshape entire industries, power the Constitution gives to Congress. The administration countered that the president needs broad authority in national security matters, and that courts should defer to executive judgment. They cited a 1976 case that upheld presidential discretion on oil imports. The question, would the court uphold sweeping executive power or draw a new line? The answer would reshape the balance of power in Washington. The Supreme Court's 6-3 decision sided with the challengers, sharply limiting the president's tariff powers. The majority opinion said a new, stricter test tariffs under Section 232 must have a clear, direct link to a specific national security threat. No more waving national security like a magic wand. The court distinguished this case from past precedents, noting the tariffs were far broader and less connected to real threats. The justices said a trade deficit with a friendly nation isn't a national security emergency. Now, the executive branch must provide detailed, credible evidence before imposing tariffs. Vague claims about the importance of an industry aren't enough. The burden of proof is much higher for the president. This is a major reassertion of judicial oversight over executive action in trade. The message Congress, not the president, controls trade policy. The era of the tariff blank check is over. The rules just got a lot tighter. Not everyone agreed. 3 justices dissented, warning the court was overstepping. They argued Congress meant to give the president broad flexibility on national security, and that the court's new test would tie the president's hands. The dissenters said national security is complex, and the executive needs all available tools. If Congress wanted to limit the president, it could change the law itself. In their view, the court was intruding on political territory and weakening the presidency. The debate highlights just how high the stakes were for American governance. The biggest impact? Power over trade policy shifts from the White House back to Congress. For years, Congress watched as the president imposed tariffs that affected every district, but struggled to reclaim authority. The court's decision forces Congress to take the wheel on trade. Future tariffs will require new legislation, public debate, and compromise. The days of setting trade policy by executive order are over, for now. The president still has some tools, but they're slower and more limited. Foreign governments will now have to navigate the complexities of Congress, not just a single executive. U.S. trade policy may become more predictable, but also slower and more political. Lawmakers will be directly accountable for the economic consequences. Congress has to pick up a tool it let rust for years. Beyond the legal drama, tariffs have real and lasting costs for both businesses and everyday consumers. These costs aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They affect jobs, prices, and the choices we make at the store. Companies that rely on imported goods suddenly faced steep price hikes, leaving them with difficult decisions. Should they absorb the extra expense and risk shrinking profits, or pass those costs on to customers, making products more expensive for everyone? In effect, the tariffs acted as a new tax on American importers, sending shockwaves through the entire economy. Every link in the supply chain felt the impact, from ports to warehouses to store shelves. While a handful of U.S. steel producers saw short-term gains, the reality was that far more manufacturers, especially those using steel and aluminum, were hurt by higher input costs and increased uncertainty. Ultimately, it was consumers who felt the pinch. Prices rose on everything from washing machines and cars to canned soup and groceries, straining household budgets and forcing families to make tough choices. The administration claimed that foreign countries would pay the tariffs, but in reality, it was American importers who paid, and those costs were almost always passed along to businesses and shoppers. The Supreme Court's decision offers hope for change, but it's important to remember that relief won't come overnight. The process of unwinding tariffs and adjusting prices takes time. Prices for upcoming seasons are already locked in, and it could take a year or even longer before lower costs finally reach consumers at the checkout. Now the government faces the complex challenge of refunding billions of dollars in tariffs collected under the old system, a process that will require time, resources, and careful oversight. For businesses, this is a long-awaited lifeline that could help them recover, reinvest, and plan for the future with more certainty. For consumers, it's a step toward normalcy, a chance to see prices stabilize and regain some confidence in the marketplace. The economic ripple effects of tariffs will take time to unwind, but with patience and careful policy, there's hope for a more stable future for everyone. The Supreme Court's decision reverberates far beyond U.S. borders. Allies and trading partners welcomed the ruling as a return to a more stable, rules-based system. The unpredictable U.S. trade policy of recent years had strained even the closest relationships. The decision paves the way for removing retaliatory tariffs and repairing diplomatic ties. It strengthens global institutions like the World Trade Organization and restores confidence in U.S. trade reliability. International businesses can now plan without fear of sudden, sweeping tariffs. The ruling helps restore certainty to global supply chains and investment. It's about more than tariffs. It's a reaffirmation of American democracy and the rule of law. The chaotic era of unilateral trade actions is closing, Congress is back in charge, and the world is watching. The Supreme Court has reshaped U.S. trade policy and sent a powerful message. The rule of law still matters. In uncertain times, that's a very big deal. Big.